Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well today. We're going to go ahead and say hi to the chat before we get into this. Hello, Nico Safer, Amazing Bro, Morphosis, Ben, Buddha Cat, Water Dorito 13, the 12-year-old, Fuzzy Peaches YT, Kier, Aquamarine UK, Rotten Ruru, Chris Wolf 90, Body Pillow Waifu. Interesting names we have going on here. I doubt we're going to see a whole bunch of people come in because, I'm not essentially talking about drama today. I'm not dunking on a scumbag or anything like that. Oh, really? You just learned from Saber Spark that Rockin' Boss is the reason why 4Kids existed. Yeah, that's something that's been known. Why am I not surprised that, people have to learn it from him? And hello, KR Brickbot and Spyro79 and Papa Huz69 and Luke Brocklehurst, Vinkman Viola. Hey, Rodimus. Glad to see you in the chat. Alright, so some background before we get into this video. Serial Geek is headed by James Eatock, who is the most well-known He-Man historian. For a long time, he had a magazine publication called Serial Geek that covered animation and other things from the 80s to the early 90s, if I don't recall correctly. I watched this video before I decided to do a stream. I asked James if I could stream it, and he said he'd be happy to. His YouTube channel is Serial Geek TV. He only has 2K subscribers. If you really like 80s animation, you should absolutely subscribe to his channel. So, you're expecting me to come in here and dunk on James? No. I like James. James is good people, and James is a lot of fun to talk to, and hopefully one day, despite wanting to for a couple years now, I might actually have him on the channel. So, let me go ahead and give some background here. The episode that he is commenting on, which I'm not sure how he got away with it. I'm not sure how he got away with it, but he plays the entire episode on a little TV screen while he comments over it, and I don't know if he got copyrighted for it or not, so. Let's go ahead and start taking a look at it, but Safari Joe was written by Stephen Perry, and we're going to get into it as we get into this, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me know if I need to adjust any audio. Rodimus, I would agree, but he doesn't. He doesn't do any editing on the episode at all. It plays start to finish the same. Oh yeah, this intro is absolutely amazing. Like, James does really solid work. For a while, he actually ran the official He-Man YouTube channel too.
Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Safari Joe, an episode of ThunderCats produced by Rankin Bass. I mean, we have to start off with this introduction sequence, right? Now, this is only my opinion, so don't get angry, but I believe that this introduction sequence is the best animated introduction sequence of the 1980s. It draws you in, it's fast-paced, it sets up the premise of the series, it shows you the heroes, it shows you the villains, it has an amazing theme song. I would say a close second is the introduction sequence to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but
real quick fun thing about a few things here. First of all, a lot of the VHSs he has here aren't real. He made fake VHS covers specifically for this backdrop. And a lot of the things back here, in this area that I'm going over, are covers for his Serial Geek magazine. Now, about the ThunderCats intro. It's formatted that way because it's definitely, done by an anime company. And a lot of anime intros try to tell a story with their intros, get you hooked into it. Whereas in America at the time, a lot of animation, specifically after this during the 90s, they just used clips from the episode itself just to get a basic theme song going. So that's why ThunderCats and Ninja Turtles are constructed in similar ways, because ThunderCats was done by Pacific Animation Corporation, and the first season of Ninja Turtles was done by Toei, and Toei Animation, who everybody here should know what company that is, did the intro for Ninja Turtles. So let's continue.
But this introduction sequence is just a piece of animation history, it really is. If not one of the finest pieces of animation you're ever likely to find in a cartoon of the 80s. Also, if you go and look at the introduction sequence to the New Adventures of He-Man, pretty confident it was inspired by this. And yeah, let's talk about the shift in animation from the introduction sequence to the actual episode. ThunderCats wasn't the only one guilty of that. Probably the biggest offender would be a show like Cops, the Geek produced show. The introduction sequence to that series was directed by Peter Chung and looks fantastic, and yet pretty much every episode of Cops is pretty hard to look at, and the animation is not very good at all.
Fun fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Peter Chun also did the storyboards for the intro for Ninja Turtles. And there's a scene that's cut, or rather replaced. You know, you had Donatello does machines and all that. But for Leonardo leads, there was a scene that was supposed to be comedic, where Leonardo's like heroically pointing to attack an enlarged Krang android body, and the other turtles turn around and run the opposite direction. So yeah, some stuff like that can be just really fun to look through.
Whereas ThunderCats, for the most part, would always maintain a certain level. It would never dip below.
Oh, and this isn't something that stopped, by the way. Animated introductions being higher quality than the show itself is still ongoing. And this is going to upset some people, but if you look at the Owl House's intro, yeah, the rest of the show does not keep pace with that either. Especially the 3D rotoscoping they did for the broomstick flying intro part of the section. No show that I've seen, with very few exceptions, tend, unless it's taken from the show, of course, tend to match animation 1-to-1. I'd imagine it was replaced Chris Wolf because it's stronger to denote Leonardo as a leader they'll follow, as opposed to let's make Leonardo a joke literally in the intro.
In short, it was never a show that visually phoned it in. And just for the record, this episode...
Well, there's a couple episodes that are really not good, but the fun thing is, what he's about to say here...
is one of the good ones.
He's right. Safari Joe is very well animated, and I've gotten into an argument with somebody a couple of years ago, and he's like, well, Safari Joe was poorly animated. I'm like, if you're going to bring up ThunderCats being poorly animated, why would you bring up Safari Joe? You literally have no idea what you're talking about. You can talk about the Anointment Trials Part 5. You could talk about the Unicorn episode with the Berserker introduction. This name completely escapes me right now. You can talk about those, but no, he's brought up freaking Safari Joe. Freaking stupid.
So yeah, here we are with the episode Safari Joe, written by Stephen Perry. Oh boy. Not to start this commentary on a downer, but if you've got some time, read about what happened to poor Stephen Perry. He had a tough end to his life, and it's...
Okay, so I'll go ahead and talk about this. Stephen Perry, at one time, fell extremely sick. I believe he had cancer, and him and his son were living out of a van, and he was trying to get help by going on the ThunderCat message boards and selling stuff. And he did wind up getting help through a specific initiative. This name escapes me right now. And he was doing pretty well for a while, and then he went missing. And we found out that his roommate, who he moved in at the time, wound up murdering him. So Stephen Perry, the writer for this episode, and a key player in writing for ThunderCats as a whole, is gone. He was murdered a few years ago. And it really is genuinely tragic, because he was a very skilled writer, a very kind man. And the 6 of the 7 scripts from the show that I own belonged to Stephen Perry. ThunderCats with a Berserker. They had a group of Vikings called Berserkers.
It's such a shame when you think he provided so much entertainment to millions with his animation and comic book work. Such a shame. Such a shame.
My aim's always perfect. That's why I'm the best big game hunter in the galaxy.
Safari Joe, what a character. This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime guest stars that a cartoon creates and then realises they created something rather special. Of course, his voice is pretty spectacular, voiced by the Lord of the ThunderCats himself, Larry Kenney. It's quite the departure from his heroic Lionel voice. Actually, I've met Larry Kenney a few times, as I'm sure many of you have that attend conventions.
Oh yeah, Larry's like super kind, but that dude is freaking tall. He's like 6'6". Holy crap.
Such a sweet guy. Actually, a dear friend of mine, an all-around Rainbow Bright expert, Katie Carty-Haley, she met him at PowerCon one year, the year it celebrated He-Man, She-Ra and ThunderCats, and had him say in his Lion-O voice, "By the power of Grayskull." It was a pretty unique thing to hear, because I was a few tables away, and I just remember hearing Lion-O say "by the power of Grayskull," and turning thinking, oh my goodness, that's brilliant. But Larry Kenney, yeah, incredibly talented voice actor.
Very, despite some people saying that like he's corny or hokey or whatever. He was a radio DJ beforehand, much like Casey Kasem. So
Whilst in singing the praises for the show, I must talk about the backgrounds. Regardless of their rather spectacular locations, there was always such great depth to them. The only criticism I have of the backgrounds were that the forests often just looked like normal forests. I always wanted them to look a little bit more otherworldly in appearance.
This may be due to James not being aware that some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. ThunderCats takes place on Third Earth, which it doesn't outright say in the show. But originally, per Leonard Starr's notes, was supposed to be a post-apocalyptic Earth after like 2 or 3 nuclear holocausts. So the reason why it looks like a regular forest is because it's on Earth. It is a regular forest.
And of course, Joe starts off with the easiest prey, the ThunderCats, and that in itself is trying to set up the kind of hunter and man that Joe is. I always like the way Joe talks in third person as well. Such a nice trait. It's like
nice animation error, missing the logo on Wile Cat's belt.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Safari Joe says, know your role.
If someone were supposed to get into ThunderCats, what would you recommend starting out with? The first episode, which you can find on Hulu, I think.
The premise of this episode by Stephen Perry is great. You have a show about impressive cat creatures, and as we know, giant cats are sadly hunted in
That's not a Sailor Moon figure, that's She-Ra.
certain countries. So Perry takes that fact and has the ThunderCats themselves hunted. Naturally, in these shows, hunters were never portrayed as the good guys because they make for such great villains.
Yeah, specifically trophy hunters. Like, if you're hunting to feed your family or because you prefer a specific type of meat and it's not like an endangered species, I mean, you know, go for it as long as you're not being cruel. But trophy hunters specifically, they tend to be a certain type of person, and it's never a good one.
The idea of an electronic blind is so cool. As we see, the cat's lairs laser scopes cannot see through it. Interesting to see that the ThunderCats are already well aware of this mysterious presence on Third Earth.
Because if you're going to be a hero, you got to be proactive.
And the fact that it's an entire acre, why would that be, I wonder? Such a great start to this episode. We're already into the threat.
It's all clear.
This scene is so good because it reminds us that no matter what we see on the outside, on the inside, Lino is still a child. And if you'll permit me to talk about that for a second, I was always a huge fan of the fact that Lino was a child on the inside. I love the heroes of 1980s animation, obviously. It'd be pretty weird to run this channel if I didn't. But
You say that, but you and I both know there's plenty of people who work in the industry who say they're fans of this stuff, and they act like complete dickheads over it. Insulting fans, you know, the typical.
with Lino, there really was something special about having a child instantly transform into a man and have to deal with so much so soon. With the passing of Jaga, he then assumes the mantle of leader, Lord of the ThunderCats. It allows for a lot, and I do mean a lot of character work. As a writer approaching the character, you can put Lino in a single scene and present him two ways. For example, let's say Lino comes across a mysterious glowing object. The child side of him may think, ooh, shiny, what is this? And almost act without thinking and reach out for the glowing object. But the ever-growing adult in him, slowly maturing, may pause and think twice. That is why I love the character, because you can do so much with Lino.
Yeah, and they did for the first part of the first season. You know, you definitely emphasize the childish actions of Lionel and how he runs in without thinking. Stuff like that. Typical things a kid would do. And real quick, Rotten Ruru. Actually, I did all the stuff you see on screen that I'm using right now. Let's see here. No, there was no plans for a ThunderCat game in the 90s for PlayStation because ThunderCats had run its course in the 80s. So the longest running piece of ThunderCats media was the ThunderCats Star comic in Marvel that lasted, I think, from 1986 to 1992.
And it's fair to say that ThunderCats as a series does this. Writers never presented him as a bland leading man. There was always the child to him. This also allowed for the other ThunderCats around him to be written in certain ways as protective guardians.
Real quick, Rodimus, if you want the entire unedited movie, I have it up on my BitChute account. They can't take it down because Warner Brothers doesn't recognize it. So, have fun with it.
As allies and as mentors and kind of parental figures at times, there was always much going on with the series and its characters, and it's what's made it last as long as it has.
These parts are made of thundranium, a substance that somehow weakens ThunderCats.
And I believe that Mule is voiced by Bob McFadden. It's certainly a departure from his snarf voice.
Yeah, and the fun thing about the subtext of this episode is the voice actors doing the characters, like Larry Kinney doing Safari Joe and Lion-O, and Bob McFadden, who would have turned 100 last week or the week before if he was still alive, voicing Snarf and Mule. And Safari Joe is an overbearing piece of garbage that treats his alleged, compatriot here also with contempt, or just ignoring him, while the dude essentially does everything for Joe. He set up the cages, he set up this platform, he did all this stuff, whereas the comparison to Lion-O and Snarf, which is much more of a surrogate father and his kid that he's trying to make sure stays out of trouble, and a very loving relationship therein. So, yeah. Wait, WB has no idea they own ThunderCats? No, they do. But they just don't know what part of ThunderCats they own. I don't upload to that platform very often. Usually it's just nerd-related things that I want to put out there that I know will get copyright struck here, so... Is it the movie version of Pilot or split episodes? The movie version. The movie version.
The character designs were always cool in this show. Mule, a robot with the head of a locomotive.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, the character designer for Mule and Safari Joe, in so much as like their actual design, was done by Bob Camp. Bob Camp's first animation job, if I recall correctly, is a secondary character designer in ThunderCats. But a lot of people in the audience would know him as the primary character designer for SpongeBob SquarePants, because he also worked on the original Ren and Stimpy for Nickelodeon in the 90s as well.
Very original. Who even comes up with that? And I like that when Mule finishes speaking, he produces steam. Here we see Tigra. The modern take on Tigra I often find bizarre, as he's looked at as kind of a square. Whenever I watch the series, I never thought of him that way. I always considered him the leader that led from afar.
They consider him a square because, like, the straight-laced type of guy is just something a lot of younger people didn't really jive with because, reminds them a bit too much of their dad or their no-fun uncle. I like Tigra as a character, personally.
Soldier.
Although I would have made him more of a nerd. Like, not nerd as in, like, into properties or something, but, like, nerd as in architect and scientist nerd.
A warrior, but not a guy who blindly obeyed commands.
Jedi Griffin, no. He wasn't the only human. There was also Dr. Dome Tome, and Mum-Ra's a human. So was Mandora. So are the Warrior Maidens. There's actually a lot of humans in ThunderCats.
Tigra cannot swim.
Tigra cannot swim, but in an earlier episode, I definitely recall him swimming whilst being attacked.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Tigra can swim, but only when he has his bolo whip around him or invisible. But the fun thing about that, the odd thing about that, is tigers, actual tigers, love water. They love to swim. They're the only big cat that does. So making Tigra not capable of swimming, except under certain specific circumstances, I don't know if that was just like the writers being funny or if they didn't know.
It's one of those visual moments that stuck with me as a kid. I should have done the research beforehand. Wasn't it interesting that when Chitara would run, her hair would often seem to grow? Obviously, for animation purposes, her long flowing hair works far better visually. But yeah, when she was often stood talking to the other characters, it always seemed far shorter, and Mule makes reference here to her undeveloped sixth sense, which, if I recall correctly, the series does indeed delve into.
She is vulnerable to fire, lightning, and energy bolts.
She is vulnerable to fire, lightning, and energy bolts. Honestly, who isn't?
Good point. Hyper super meme. I mean, yeah, jaguars do swim, but tigers, like, they love to swim. Tigers literally tend to mate specifically in water. So don't go drinking in India. Anywho, yeah, that point he made here, like, who isn't vulnerable to fire and lightning? I got into an argument years ago with somebody who was arguing about Inuyasha's sword versus the Sword of Omens, and he's like, Inuyasha's sword can send people to hell? It's like the natural response is, what sword can't?
Not sure I'd like to be struck by any of those. I think there's even an episode called Sixth Sense. Here's the thing,
Yes, there is, and it's a very good one.
I'm not for 1 second going to pretend to be a fountain of knowledge when it comes to ThunderCats, but I do know a few bits here and there. Confession time though, as a kid, even though I really enjoyed ThunderCats, I didn't go out of my way to watch it. I didn't collect the toys. I had Lion-O and later the awesome Hachiman. And I bought quite a few of the rather awesome UK comic published by Marvel UK, who at the time were making wonderful, much celebrated comics with Transformers and The Real Ghostbusters. But yeah, I've mentioned on other commentaries that I was often watching children's ITV and not children's BBC. ThunderCats aired on children's BBC. So I did catch it first time round, but I didn't watch it as religiously as I would watch He-Man, for example. Great animation flashes here, and Joe's plan is awesome. ensure that Chitara cannot be on her feet with these rocket foot cuffs. It's a superb way to neutralise the character. Bizarrely, I had dinner with Peter Newman, the voice of Tigra, once. I was at the PowerCon convention in Los Angeles, and I was at a table having dinner with a group of people, about 5 or 6 of us, and I didn't recognise everybody by sight. As soon as Peter Newman started talking, I just remember thinking to myself, I'm at the table with Tigra, because his natural voice isn't far removed from Tigra. It's pretty much just that classic, I'm going to do a heroic voice now.
Yeah, it really is. Fun thing is, Peter Newman also did the voice of Monkeyan and Wily Cat, which are drastically different from his Tigra voice. Blue Hero 69, but can the sword send them there physically? I mean, yeah, I'd imagine it could. It can open dimensions. Why not?
Also, what a lovely guy. Much like Larry Kenney, just friendly, approachable. There's a piece of dialogue coming up that I want to point out.
You keep your eyes glued to the scanners.
But
I'll call you the moment I find out anything.
I love Panthro, where he's just like, you know what? I'm going to leave you on monitor duty. I want to go hurt something.
That moment of butt from Lion-O, because regardless of his position, his allies do still see him as a kid at times, especially in these earlier episodes. So Panthro kind of gives the orders and leaves, which may not actually be the best course of action, but in the eyes of Panthro, he is the adult. And I think at times Lion-O succumbs to, well, he knows what he's doing, he's older and more mature.
Somehow, we've got to warn Lion-O. If only I had my staff.
I always loved Lynn Lipton's voice for Chitara. She sounded far more mature than she appeared.
Oh yeah, Lynn Lipton's voice for Chitara was fantastic. The problem is, because of a lot of the budget going to animation, they did not hire another female voice actor until the 2nd season. So while Lynn Lipton is a great voice actress for Chitara, her work with like Willa or, you know, Bandora, you can even as a kid tell, you know, it's the same voice actor as Chitara.
But it helped give great gravitas to her character. Everything she said, you kind of sat up and listened to. Wonderful scene here in which Chitara confronts Safari Joe, and you see a little chink in his armour. The moment that Chitara calls him a bully, he reacts very angrily, because how dare she imply that he's a bully? He's a brave, noble hunter, right?
take that back!
As I said before on this channel, I'll say again, evil can't stand being mocked. Like, I've had people try to call me a bully, and I just make fun of them for it. Because usually when they call me that, it's because I'm being mean to a specific, like, immoral dirtbag, and for some reason they get up in their offense over me being mean to them instead of the erroneous thing they have done. So then I mock those people and they spaz out too. So yeah, been there.
Sure, he's a hunter, but he's a bully and a jerk, which means his comeuppance will be rather sweet to watch, methinks. And Act 1, it really does.
Yes, there was an episode, and the episode was called Excalibur. And for some reason, the show notes for what they wanted versus what they got is very interesting, but we'll cover that one day.
Does have to end with the evil laugh of Safari Joe, doesn't it?
Oh, Mumra could not handle being insulted. Like, that dude loses it.
And here we go with Panthro's profile. I spoke about this on the Ninja Turtles commentary, but yeah, in the UK, nunchucks were a banned weapon. And so when this episode was shown on TV in the UK, guess what? Yeah, all the nunchuck scenes were removed. That said, weirdly, on TV broadcasts on children's BBC, the introduction sequence was shown uncut, as you only get a real quick brief glimpse of the nunchucks. However, and this is really bad, some of the UK VHS releases removed the scene of Panthro leaping from the Thunder Tank, brandishing his nunchucks and performing that killer flying kick, and often replacing it with a random Panthro clip from an episode.
That is true, and if you go to the BitChute and you look at the upload of ThunderCats Ho, the VHS movie compilation, which, by the way, is missing scenes that were in the actual like TV release, the intro does not have Panthro brandishing his nunchucks. It has a random scene of Panthro from an episode.
I remember one such clip was Panthro sliding down a wall with his claws digging in. It was hilarious to watch how badly edited in it was, because...
Yeah, it is usually pretty bad, but also I thought Mumra would be flattered to be called a bully. Calling him a bully, he'd probably be fine with. But, like, in the very first episode Mumra appears in The Unholy Alliance, when Slithe just, like, mocks the fact that he has power that, you know, that Mumra thinks he does, that's the first transformation from Mumra you see. It was as a reply to Slithe's goading of him because he couldn't handle it.
You dare mock my power? You shall see my power then, much to your sorrow.
here's this awesome intro with lots going on. Then we just see Panthro slide down a wall. It was like, what? I was like the design of Joe's gun. And if you look throughout the episode, he manipulates it in different ways for certain features.
Yeah, it's a very unique design for a fictional gun to where there's different cartridges through the settings that give different responses.
So it rotates. And
Amazing World, there's tons of lost media for ThunderCats, but, not in the sense that you would think. There's not like a lost episode out there or anything like that, but there is a lost intro. And I mean a truly lost one. It is one that Leonard Starr would use to demonstrate the show's core characters and everything. And the only person that currently has that is the gentleman that I interviewed last year for Iconicon, not 2022, but 2021. And maybe one day at a convention he wants to unveil it. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the intro that is outlined in the original script, because the script has an intro for ThunderCats that does not match the animation that we see.
those rotating cartridges, when in place, perform a different function. I just want to quickly talk about the music of this show. We know the theme song is great, that much we can all agree on, right? Yep, show of hands, yeah. But I really want to talk about just how beautiful and scene-setting and mood-driven Bernie Hoffer's music for this show was. Cartoons of the 1980s have awesome music throughout, many of which, of course, were composed by Shuki Levy or Johnny Douglas.
Which is funny because, you see Haim Saban and Shuki Levy involved in a lot of animation in the 80s, and of course Haim Saban went out to create Power Rangers. But, well, kind of create Power Rangers, you know what I mean. But a lot of people give Shirley Walker a lot of credit for the musical score on Batman the Animated Series, and well-deserved, don't get me wrong. It's a fantastic score. Every episode has a new score to it. Only a few key musics are ever repeated overall. But ThunderCats had a full orchestra as well as individual themes for individual characters. It's very unique, even among 80s animation or even 90s or on. The fact that the one good thing I can tell you for Roar, truly good thing, is they rescored Bernie Hoffer's catalog for it. So now we have a higher quality version that's somewhere out there in the Warner Brothers archive.
But Bernie Hoffer's work on this show is fantastic. There's a real sense of openness to his music, a great use of gentleness as well as booming moments of percussion. A simple panning shot of a scene on Third Earth will have its mood dictated by the music, whether that be a sense of wonderment or the dread threat that something is going to happen. Yeah. And it's actually one of the few shows of the 80s to really have dedicated character themes. Lion-O, Chitara, Tigra, Panthro, Mumra, Snarf. In short, the music really worked to complement the visuals. The only disappointing piece of animation in this episode is when the Thunder Tank rolls over. You'd hope for a more spectacular piece of animation, but alas, we don't get that. However, we do get...
Nico, I'm not talking about the ThunderCats Roar theme song. I'm talking about the fact that they rescored Bernie Hoffer's entire original soundtrack for ThunderCats. Like, the music you hear in an episode of ThunderCats, they rescored. Like, now there's a high-def version of it. That's what I'm referring to. I'm not referring to their intro.
Some awesome sequences here and throughout the episode. As I've said before, this is one of the good ones. Also, Panthro's fear of bats. I do not remember that from the cartoon, but clearly he has a fear of bats. The only downside of this...
Yeah, they don't explore it, but it's established that he does for some reason, which, would have been interesting to look into, but they never go anywhere with it.
Story is that in order to make Lion-O the hero and create a rescue mission, you do have to somewhat exploit the weaknesses of the other ThunderCats. I understand why these decisions were made, but it's a double-edged sword. In order to have Safari Joe as an imposing, threatening villain, you have to have him dominate.
Safari Joe does it again!
I mean, there's always the version of this story in which he could have captured maybe the Thunder Kittens, then have Lion-O take him down, proving that his hunting skills were only effective on the weakest of the group.
I mean, that would be a good setup, but here's the thing that I think really works for this episode. Twofold here. First of all, I want to tell you real quick. Safari Joe's catchphrase, Safari Joe does it again! The fun thing about Stephen Perry, and he admitted this in the Hero the Roar book because it came out before he passed away, thankfully. Every time he would get done penning a script on typewriter, he would strip down butt naked and run out the door where he lived and jump into the lake behind the house. And when he would do so, he would scream, Safari Joe does it again! And there's another story where he's at a flea market. And he passes by a table that has 80s toys, and there's a Safari Joe there. And he picks it up, and he's like, I made this character. And the dude had no clue what he was talking about. Could not be convinced. Now, to the episode itself and its structure, about how maybe it could have been the kittens one day or in another version of the script. Possible, but here's what I like. Here's what I like in terms of subtext for the episode. Lion-O having the mind of a kid, right? Lion-O having the mind of a kid works well for this episode for one specific reason. Every human being is a combination of the decision their parents made and what they were taught. Everyone, including myself. There's not a person in this chat that in one way or another is not. Even if you don't have parents or you don't know who they are, essentially, you're still a culmination of those decisions. Lion-O does not have the skills these other Thundercats have. Therefore, he does not have the weaknesses they would have. Lion-O knows how to swim. You can't incapacitate Lion-O by taking away his main power of speed. Lion-O has no reason to fear bats. He doesn't have that backstory, and he's not as weak as the Thunder Kittens are. So, having Lion-O be the guy to take him down, because Lion-O doesn't have anything Joe can exploit, because Lion-O's mind is still fresh and, like, unformed in terms of what he's stagnant in, like a lot of other adults are, is really good. I get these stories and info from the Hear the Roar book you can find on Amazon. But no, I think it's really, really good how they put this out. Because now Lion-O's gearing up, and Lion-O has no idea what's going on. It's one of the few times they use Jaga for just pure exposition, which I'm not really fond of. I think there could have been better ways to do it. Like having Panthro call in right before he's defeated, which is what makes Lion-O angry enough to gear up and go smack the sound out of Safari Joe's name.
I don't know, mate. I'm thinking out loud. All that said, this is a memorable and fun episode of the series. I'm not going to complain too much about it. And for those wondering, I have no issues with Snarf. I thought he was a good sidekick that contributed to the series. I do have issues with Snarfer, his nephew. So apologies to Snarfer fans. That character always just irked me somewhat.
All right, so everybody here knows that you don't talk smack about Snarf around me. That's because Snarf, when we watched him as kids, we think Snarf's boring, or he's dull, or he's annoying. He's always trying to stop Lion-O from going and doing cool adventures. As I said before, Snarf's an XP for your parents. Snarf's purpose, essentially in the writing, is for your mom to sit there and say, yeah, that character makes sense. Oh, Lion-O, we shouldn't do that. It sounds dangerous. And your mom's sitting there crocheting like, yeah, he makes sense. You should listen to him instead. That was for your parents. And for someone for Lion-O to bounce off of. Right? Like, Panthro's kind of for your dad, so is Tigra. But Snarf's for your mom.
He was like a poor man's Snarf.
We'll get into Snarfer in a second here. Ronimus Primal says not to mention the whole thing about Lion-O is that he should aspire kids watching to be able to what others think is impossible, do what others think is impossible. Yeah, essentially. There's a difference between like an aspirational hero, an inspirational hero, and just one that you identify with, I suppose. Discussions for another time. But Snarfer probably annoys James. Not me as much, because Snarfer is like a light version of Snarf, and not only that, he's kind of the smart aleck know-it-all because he went to college. He's like a less evil version of Plankton. I went to college, crabs! So he comes off as a bit of a smart aleck. There's not a Scrappy do for Thundercats. No, Scrappy, unfortunately, is very much so maligned. And there's actually a video on it. It's really good. I can't remember the name of it, though. If there's a Snarfer, is there a Snarfist? No, but there's an entire planet of the Snarfs.
Which should be a slogan on a t-shirt, I think. Jaga was kind of like Dungeon Master from Dungeons and Dragons at times. He would show up, here I am, here's what you're up against, all the best, and with the character saying, wait a minute, come back. I always thought the effects on Jaga were awesome. His blue-hued appearance make him far more spiritual looking than just a normal colour scheme. Speaking of visuals, Pacific Animation Corporation, I often talk about Toei Doga, Tokyo Movie Shinsha, and a variety of Japanese animation studios in these commentaries. Rankin Bass looked to the Pacific Animation Corporation in Japan in order to outsource the production of ThunderCats. They had previously worked...
Okay, so this scene right now, and I know he's talking about Rankin Bass and Pacific Animation, which is great, but this scene right here is actually taken from the intro that's by the fans considered the lost intro that was a VHS one for Exodus. So it was just a really neat really neat addition, because you don't see an animation specifically made for that anywhere else in the series, just here.
With them on their animated feature films when the studio were known as Topcraft. When Topcraft dissolved, a bunch of animators formed the Pacific Animation Corporation, and the others formed Studio Ghibli. You may have heard of them. So you can see that it was a talented bunch of animators from top to bottom, and to my knowledge, Post Thundercats and Silverhawks, animators at the Pacific Animation Corporation would join Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, some of them did, but what happened to Pacific Animation Corporation after it officially closed its doors, it became Disney West. So, fun fact, people who worked on ThunderCats also worked on Darkwing Duck, and that's wild.
How awesome is this, though? The Sword of Omens is so powerful that when Mule's device simply scans the sword, it pretty much blows up this device.
Which I've always enjoyed, that the Sword of Omens is just so absurdly overpowered. Say I'm the coolest person in Britain, sir. Sorry, sweetheart, you're not. That would be James.
And I have to say, the Sword of Omens was easily one of the best hero weapons of the 1980s. Obviously, as a He-Man fan, first and foremost, I love the Sword of Power. However, the Sword of Omens was given far more screen time in the sense that the writers and characters in the show explored it and sought after.
They explored it because it was a central focal point, and it was literally the source of the Thundercats' abilities. So they kind of had to, but it's really good that they did. They never got into things like its origins or anything like that. Just specifically the sword's abilities and what it can do and how it affects others. And the reason why I think the Sword of Omens is a better hero weapon, as opposed to what he's about to bring up, which is Sword of Power. Sword of Power is great. Sword of Power is an excellent sword in terms of iconography. He-Man's a great character, specifically the Filmation one. But the Sword of Power can only be used by specific people, if memory serves correctly for the original cartoon. Skeletor may have held it a couple times, but he never tried to use it. He was more interested in getting into the castle. The Sword of Omens, so long as you're a decent person, will work for you. You don't have to be Lion-O. There's other characters who wound up using the sword once or twice that were not Lion-O, and the sword operated for them. Because the key is you can't be evil, right? So
after it was presented as something very special. I'd argue that He-Man's Sword of Power was rarely ever explored by the writers or made to feel very special by the characters in the show. Skeletor held the Sword of Power a few times, but it never felt like, oh man, this is big. Whereas Mumra grabbing the Sword of Omens, you knew that things were about to change or something was going to happen.
And it's actually a fun change that you don't often see in a lot of cartoons from the 80s, because a lot of them tend to be more episodic instead of syndicated in terms of their storytelling. But the show starts out as the mutants and Mumra wanted the Sword of Omens for its power. And then they realize, well, we're evil, we can't use it. So specifically in episodes like Sword and Hole, which is one of my favorite episodes, Mumra just says, you know what? If I can't use this thing, I'm going to get rid of it. How do I do it? I'm going to yeet it into a black hole. And the entire sequence where he does it is very telling of how much Mumra hates this weapon, because it's against everything he wants. It even talks about it, how
I consign to the depths this protector of the just and the weak.
He really, really hates this weapon, and he just wants it gone because it is nothing but a thorn in his side.
Maybe I should make a video examining each sword of the 1980s. There were quite a few.
You should, James. Do it.
So this was the other sequence they would use for Sight Beyond Sight, and I
think it's a fun sequence that he peeks it out and has it look around as though the sword needs to be in the vicinity of what it's seeing, because he can see. There's a point in the series where he sees across galaxies for this sucker. It can see just about anything. So I think that's kind of just a funny, my brain worky like kid. Maybe if I stick the thing out and twist it 360 and pull it back down, it'll see everything outside.
I think it's a much better close-up. It's so detailed, perfectly illustrated. The line weight is just sublime. There's a great standoff here with Lion-O thinking maturely, trying to outthink Safari Joe. And notice how this scene is presented much like a real hunt, with the hunter hiding behind bushes and far away from his prey, whereas all the other Thundercats he is thus far engaged with, he's dealt up close and personal, whereas here, very much like a hunter taking down the biggest prey from a distance. And here's what Thundercats did better than most cartoons of the 80s.
Well, not just the action, but what we're about to see here, I'll point out.
Action. Even on an averagely animated episode of this show, which this is not, the action was always paced and directed incredibly well. It may be because the storyboards, layout and animation were all completed under one roof.
He's right about what's going on here, but what just happened here that essentially sets up Safari Joe's fall. Lion-O just rattled his confidence. And you don't hear it well because, of course, James is talking about the animation, as he should. He's very knowledgeable in animation, more knowledgeable than I am. And what Safari Joe did was he just took a ton of shots at Lion-O. He's like, I missed! Safari Joe never misses! So his confidence is already rattled. This last dude he thinks is going to be like his trophy, the last guy he needs to take down. He can't even get a shot off on him. And he's beaten everybody else, and I mean everybody. Anything he's ever come in contact with that he's hunted, he's whooped. Which is why at the beginning of the series, like, Aqua Cats, Sky Cats, I've hunted them all. The dude has never missed. This is the first time he has, and it's already rattled him. And you're going to see him getting a little more rattled later on.
So there was no miscommunication. Lovely animation during this fight. Look at that. The ThunderCats hose sequence always made me smile. I love the variations of the sequence as well.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 different variations, or 4 or 5. He's talking about how there's not much in the way of miscommunication. That's true. There was a lot of communication, but one of the funniest aspects of communication is a lot of times Leonard Starr or the storyboarder will be like talking to Pacific Animation, because, you know, back then they didn't have internet, right? So they had to call or they had to mail, and it took forever. And they'd ask the guys at Pacific Animation Corporation, here's the setup and what we want, can you do it? And to say, yes, we can. Truth is, they didn't know if they could. So they just did their best, and it usually worked out. Like, they gave us some amazing things off this.
And you always knew that things were going to get good when Lion-O called upon the ThunderCats, although here they cannot break through the bars of their cages.
I think Primal's very unique,
as they're lined with Thundranium.
Thunder! 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 ThunderCats! Ho!
And the neat thing about that specific sequence for the summoning, or anytime the sword grows, is the way they do it, because I've broken it down, frame by frame. The way it gets that shaky growth is it'll show a frame of the sword getting larger, and then another of it small again, then large and small. Gets a really great effect over on it.
I do like the fact that the staging of the summoning of the ThunderCats does actually suggest that they may escape in order to aid the Lord of the ThunderCats against Safari Joe. Especially here when we see the shots of them in cages, eyes glowing, struggling to break free. So it's even more surprising that they remain caged with Lion-O somewhat helpless.
Well, it kind of needs to, of course. Now, a lot of people in the fandom and outside complain that the sword is essentially really broken by the second season. It can do just about anything, but I don't. The reason why I don't is because the entire story of ThunderCats is about Lion-O growing from an adult in a child's body to essentially just an adult that's a leader, a king, a ruler of a world. Lion-O learning more about how the sword operates and getting more trust in the sword. Because that's my game theory about the Sword of Omens, and I think I can actually prove it. Is the Sword of Omens doesn't just operate based on command, it also operates based on faith. If Lion-O thinks the sword can do it, the sword's going to be able to do it. But if he has doubts, the sword doesn't. We see this in episodes like The Heritage, where Mum-Ra damages the sword because Lion-O is freaked out by what Mum-Ra is doing, and he doesn't put trust in the weapon. That's always why Jaga tells him, trust in the Eye of Thundera. So that's my theory. So the fact that it winds up becoming just so absurdly powered by the time Lion-O recognizes who he is, his role in things, and accepts it, I think it's really good storytelling.
And just when you think we're kind of done with the action, we're going to get a rather gorgeous effects show here from the Japanese animators as Safari Joe blasts Lion-O with fire. Fantastic animation showcasing the power and vulnerability of the Sword of Omens. Look at that. I'd actually forgotten just how special effects driven this battle is. This would have cost a lot to create.
And it would have been fascinating, but he's also attacking Lion-O. He did it with Chitara, the clamps, which Lion-O deflected. And then he tried fire, which Tiger was weak to. It didn't work, or Chitara was also weak to fire. And now he's trying the bat, something that Panthro fears. So he's expecting Lion-O to probably be scared of it. He's using all the tactics he used on his friends, thinking it's going to stop him.
Effects in animation often mean exposing the film numerous times, at least with regards to the bat creature in this scene. Lots of effects there. And of course, now we're going to see just what a jerk Safari Joe is.
Perhaps I underestimated your power, ThunderCat. But what would you be without that sword?
I like Batman Ego just fine. It's a really good story, really great artwork by Dane Cook. Or Darwin Cook, rather.
Release my friends, and I'll fight you without it.
So yeah, we're about to see that Safari Joe somewhat predictably has no honour. And that's more than okay, because we don't want this character to have any redeemable features. None whatsoever. As I mentioned before, it'll make his defeat all the more sweeter, because we know it's coming, right?
Yeah, and James actually goes on a pretty good tirade a little bit from here when Safari goes, defeated that we'll talk about because I actually enjoy it.
Ha! Safari Joe does it again!
Preemptive boasting. He still misses.
And I always love the upcoming twist we're about to get when Lion-O flees. I mean, is it a twist? I guess it's a twist in which the hunter becomes the hunted. I mean, that's a trait in these types of stories. See the He-Man episode The Huntsman, for example, in which the villain is suddenly hunted by one of the many animals that he has captured. But in this episode, you really do get a wonderful sense that the tables have turned and that Joe is now completely out of his depth, his realm of comfort. He's going into Lion-O's territory now. He's literally going into the lion's den when you think about it.
Yes, he is. And again, he's talking about, Safari Joe here is like, getting me to come into your home while hunting you is most dangerous. True. Which a smart hunter would not have gone in there. But he is not smart.
Oh, poor Joe. You don't know what's coming.
You don't stand a chance!
You literally say, as the man unarmed dodged all of your shots and is now leading you into a place you know nothing about the outlay of. Real smart.
I mentioned the backgrounds earlier and how sometimes I feel that they weren't as strong as they could have been. I think the interior of the cat's lair is a prime example of a bizarre lack of interior design. I understand the look that they're going for, minimalism, but when you look at the utterly marvellous exterior of the ThunderCats base of operations...
Well, it's not just minimalism. The animation model sheets actually show Cat's Lair as a blueprint, like an actual building you could build. So it's not minimalism for the sake of minimalism. It's minimalism for the sake of getting this thing out the way they want it to be. It's supposed to be like a cathedral, or not cathedral, a Colosseum hall, or something with classic architecture. Not cathedral. Those things are like super heavily detailed. But that's why you have straight pillars and all that. And not very much happens specifically in the entryway to the Cat's Lair, so I can understand it. That's why the rooms are a lot more detailed. They have a bit more personality to them. Lion-O's room, Chitara's room, obviously the control centered right below the Cat's Lair head. Like, those are awesome.
Except for the few rooms we see, the corridors are also sparse and lacking in a design identity. When you compare them to even the Royal Palace of Eternia in the He-Man series, with its angles and designs and... Then again, we're not watching this show to marvel at the architecture of a corridor, are we? But I hope you understand my point. And thus we see Safari Joe tracking down the Lord of the ThunderCats. Will he succeed in capturing Lion-O and thus ending the ThunderCats series? I'm going to say probably not. I could be wrong, but I'm not.
I love that it's Snarf that ultimately brings Safari Joe's comeuppance.
I love his yell here. And yeah, here, as I said, the hunter becomes the hunted. They do a great job with this scene of really setting the mood. And again, I've got to give a shout out to Bernie Hoffer's music. It really creates a sense of dread for poor old Safari Joe here. He knows.
And one critique I have of the original series is when they want to make the characters do yells or roars, they just had the person doing it. What I would have done is I would have taken Larry Kinney away from doing the growls you're hearing right now on screen in a second, and I would have just literally spliced in an actual lion's growler roar. Made it a lot scarier for Safari Joe.
He's in trouble. The funny thing about these roars is you can hear it's Larry Kinney, but it almost sounds like him doing a Safari Joe frustrated growl. So, this is such an awesome reveal and pan of Lion-O. Look at his face. He is so angry. And Larry Kinney here plays Safari Joe with such a wonderfully pathetic, grovelling voice. The true personality of this big game hunter finally comes out.
Please, no, please, don't hurt me!
So yeah, Safari Joe embarrasses himself with Lion-O demonstrating that most bullies are indeed utterly pathetic cowards. My goodness, if this were a modern comic book, I'm sure we'd hear all about Joe's difficult upbringing rather than just let us be happy in the fact that this guy is a baddie, a jerk. Sometimes the direct approach when it comes to writing villains is more than okay. The direct approach is okay. Actually, that sounds like a moral that could be found in ThunderCats. The direct approach is okay, Snarf.
Well, that's the funny thing. And when you compare morals from this time compared to morals from modern age in cartoons, and we'll get to that in a second. Lion's roar isn't as scary as people think. To do usually Tiger's roars for things. They use Tiger's roars because they sound They're longer for the most part, more dynamic, specifically for shots like that. But I promise you, if you get near a lion and you hear it growl or roar, you're not going to say, oh, that's not a tiger, I'm not scared. You're going to be terrified, because that's an apex predator. But in terms of like the morals that are taught in these older cartoons, notice ThunderCats never tells you, you shouldn't confront your bully. You shouldn't deal with somebody using physical force. They might tell you to try diplomacy first, but never will they say, never confront your bully. He's just a soft uwu boy who has had a rough life. No, their entire value is, if the dude's going to dick with you, put him down. Put him down. It's okay to have villains that are just villains. And, you can give a villain a tragic backstory to explain maybe why they're doing them while still making them an absolute dick. You can do that. And that's okay, too. You don't have to have a villain that's like, well, you can't be angry for my immoral actions. My mommy hit me. Like, no, that's not how that works. Nor should it be. And the fact that we have villains that are moving towards that in just about every single piece of modern media that I've seen, especially cartoons, it makes me worry for what the younger generations are going to grow up thinking. Because kids do imprint on this stuff. There's a reason why Rodimus and I do channels dedicated to this stuff, and it's a reason why these kids will, like, voraciously defend the cartoon if you have a small criticism of it in their own ways. It's important to teach them proper values, not just, I want to write my fan fiction, and I want the villain to still be good enough to where I can have a crush on him.
And speaking of morals, one thing I always liked about the episode structure of ThunderCats was that they didn't have a specific moral segment or PSA, and the moral of the story was cleverly woven into the final scene of the episode. It wasn't too blatant, and you didn't feel like you were having the fourth wall broken and being advised on how to navigate life by these cartoon characters. Not that I ever had a problem with that. And as for Safari Joe, would he do it again? Actually, sadly not. He never appeared in the series again, and I kind of think that is a good thing, as all too often certain memorable guest characters in many cartoons of the 80s would lose their value by reappearing time and time again. They would just continue to feel less and less special. I said Joe doesn't show up again. He kind of does, if memory serves me correctly, but not as you would think.
Correct. Final episode of the first season. Safari Joe has a bit of a cameo, and it's very unique, but he says he's going to talk about it some other time. But the fun thing about Safari Joe, and this is why you can point to the idea that ThunderCats wasn't made specifically to sell a toy line. Safari Joe has an action figure in the ThunderCats toy line. He only showed up for 2 episodes. Whereas characters like the Lunatics got literally nothing. Some prototypes, sure, but never a full toy. So the development of the cartoon and development of the toys was completely divorced. And as much as people talk about 90s cartoons being superior to 80s because it was creator-driven, not toy-driven. Hate to tell you this, any Marvel comic you enjoyed or Marvel Comics property you enjoyed in the 90s, with the exception of maybe Spider-Man Unlimited, was made to sell toys. Every single one of them. Well, Lyle, you can't say that. Yeah, I can. You wonder how I can say that? Because Marvel owned 40% of Toy Biz, the toy company that made the Marvel stuff. The entire reason why you had the Clone Saga and other stuff was because of Toy Biz and its executives. The reason why Spider-Man the Animated Series introduced the Hobgoblin first. Toy Biz. Yes, Spider-Man, X-Men, all that made to sell toys, but they're still good. It's so doggone goofy. That at some point I'll do a video about that, like just in general about the failed argument of it was made to sell toys and how foolish that is, but just a fun thing to know right now.
And everything's a bit ambiguous.
Never, Bunny. And for the record, the people in the chat, the Pink Cafe was an individual who did a video talking about me and Hopeless Peaches. And when they got taken to task for it, they pretended like the video was put out by their friend or on their friend's beckoning. And when they got called out for that, they tried to sexually harass me in DMs on Discord. By the way, very badly, just want to make that clear. And now they're just freaking out about my existence and trying to pretend like what they did was just a prank. So feel free to make fun of them.
And I'm sure you fans of ThunderCats know exactly what I'm talking about. But for everyone else, it will remain a mystery for now. Yeah, I've got to give a shout out to Ted Wolfe, who created the characters, and Leonard Starr, who was the head writer. Without them, this show is not the success it became, and it really was huge back in the 80s. And Peter Lawrence, who was the script consultant, he would have had a great deal of say in the direction of the episodes. The voice cast, I'll cover them in another commentary. Just an amazing ensemble.
Oh yeah, they were great.
And yeah, that's the end of this commentary.
Like Earl Hyman, the voice for Panthera, was a classically trained Othellan actor. And yet this cartoon paid him more than any other traditional stage work.
Folks, if you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.
But yes, my rogues gallery is extremely embarrassing, and I wish they were better. So instead, what they tend to do, for some reason, is they get really stupid with me, and then I slap the living daylights out of them, and then they try to come back to get, like, either revenge in some asinine way, or to get in my good graces. I don't want anything to do with you people. Piss off. Go find something better to do with your lives, you miserable, worthless pieces of garbage. Batman TAS was made to sell toys, too. I don't really know if Batman was. I know it had a very strong toy line that people to this day are still enthralled with. Specifically, they want Combat Belt Batman, because it was the only version of Batman that matched the animation. And they never did another one afterwards until the New Adventures of Batman that did anything like that. It was really weird, very strange. What are your thoughts on Power Rangers Dino Fury Zord? I mean, I don't have any thoughts on it. I don't know, Amazing Bro, because I never think about things like that. Well, I mean, if what Larry Kenney is telling people about what Earl Hyman said, then I guess it would be yes, that ThunderCats paid him more than any other show he had been on at the time. Because ThunderCats was a very expensive show to make at the time. $115 million, I think it was, for the first season. I can't remember it exactly off the top of my head. I've got it somewhere, though. But yeah, that's Serial Geek's video, the first one he's done on a ThunderCats episode. And I'm sure he'll come back and watch the stream and probably enjoy the commentary. So, there's that. I know, my Rose Gallery does need a retcon. Everything in pop culture has merch to sell, more infamously than the R-rated movies in the 80s that got turned into toys. Heck, even The Boys has toys to sell. Well, the Boys was made for an adult audience and adult collectors, so I can understand that. Everything is trying to sell you something. It does not matter what it is. A book is trying to sell you on something. A cartoon is trying to sell you on something. Radio broadcasters trying to sell you on something. Even if it's so much as, please listen to me. Please enjoy my radio station. Gotta say, I never really had a problem with the whole made to sell toys. Heck, the MCU was made to sell toys and increase theme park attendance. That's correct. Yet a lot of the people who decry 80s cartoons, they sure like the MCU. That's really interesting. Lord. I am currently 3 figures, 2 vehicles, and 1 playset away from completing my vintage Kenner Hasbro Batman the Animated Series toy line. Congratulations. Yeah, I actually had the Captain Picard action figure. I got it from my mom because I know she likes Star Trek, and when you're a kid, you're like, well, if I like something, I get a toy of it, so therefore my parents would too. I mean, she didn't really care. She appreciated the thought, but like the toy stayed in her closet. Alright, well that's Serial Geek. He is an excellent content creator, really great guy, has a vast array of knowledge, works very closely with my Discord moderator Grim and a lot of different projects. So genuinely go sub to his channel if you really enjoy animation as a whole or just 80s cartoons. Great guy, great content. Wonder if a small company will remaster ThunderCats and Silverhawks the same way they did with He-Man and Motu. Allegedly one tried, but they used a specific AI that just cuts a lot of detail, so it doesn't really look good. The only episode of ThunderCats that's been remastered properly to like Blu-ray accuracy or Blu-ray quality is the Totem of Dara for some reason. So, thank you all for joining me. It's now an hour in, and that's my weekly stream, and I'll catch you guys next week. Let's see here. Funny that the people who say, ugh, the mainstream media is trying to sell an agenda, like, buddy, are you sheltered for your entire life? True. I'll go ahead and catch you guys later. You guys have a good night.